Hey everyone, happy Monday. All right, everyone, I'm gonna go ahead and just get kicked off here with a couple really quick announcements, and then we'll dive into our capstone demo day here. Just a quick heads up, if I drop in the middle of me talking, it's because my power went out. So Max, if that happens, if you wouldn't mind just going through the list of the students, just as a heads up, I don't think it'll happen, but I've had my lights flickering a little bit here. I'm sure many others have as well. Just want to give a heads up. I'll rejoin from my phone if my power does go out. But all right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. Just a couple really quick things. I'm sure you've all seen this before, but all right. So real quick, can everyone see my screen okay? Perfect. All right, so just really quick couple things, just as a heads up. So in observance of Independence Day next week, which I can't believe is already next week, we're having no class on the 5th. So just a heads up, everyone, enjoy. We're currently, just as an FYI, there's a little change to the schedule here. So Max is actually teaching the next 4 weeks here. So week 7 and 8, the server-side JavaScript with Node, making your APIs, intro to databases, data modeling. So Max will be teaching this week and then the next 3 weeks as well. We also had a slight change with our teaching assistants. So Kayla is going to be helping out this week, and then Karen will be helping out weeks 17, 18, and 19, just a heads up for folks where you can get help for in the chat. Max did post a capstone check-in assignment in Google Classroom. So just as a heads up, if you can please, I know we normally do these demo days, but if you can also complete that when you're able, essentially what you'll say right here, just provide that to us and any code examples you have. That'll just help all the instructors get a better sense for those that don't tune into these capstone demo days, where everyone's at, how we can help, and sort of help to inform the rest of the program here. So please complete that when you're able. It's in Classroom. Let Max or myself know if you have any questions.
I also will be giving everyone a grade of a 1, 2, 3 on your capstone. And that's really just a check-in point. So, you can get feedback. If you're feeling behind, you may actually find that I say, no, you're actually good. You're staying on track or whatever it is. So I will be providing feedback there, and the 1, 2, 3 score, where 3 is way ahead, 2 is meeting expectations, and then 1 is a little behind. But that's just, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to give you guys direct feedback.
Perfect. Thank you, Max. Appreciate that. So everyone, please, that'll be really good feedback to get from Max as well. So please complete that assignment when you're able to. All right, so with that, we've done this a million times before. So just capstone demo days, talk a little bit about updates since last time, all that good stuff. Share your screen if you have anything you'd like to share. I know we had just wrapped up React, so hopefully, if you're deciding to use React, feel free to share any updates you have with that. Again, right now, you're just kind of starting with the server-side API stuff. Get into databases soon. By the end of these modules, applying what you've learned. So I think a good milestone for many of you, again, not all of you, but for many of you, if you are using React, thinking about how you would use React to interface with the API that you'll hopefully be creating in these next few modules. So just start to think about that stuff. That'll kind of be like a good check-in by the end of these modules, is creating API, if applicable, to interface with your React app, again, if you're going down the route of React. So just kind of like a quick little touch point on where we think you should be. And again, if you don't feel as though you're up to speed, Max will give that feedback for everyone in that assignment. So please submit that to us and we can help provide that feedback. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll go in order here. Kicking off with Ariel. If you want to go ahead and provide any updates you have in your Ariel, and then on deck we'll have Brandy.
Okay, so I have been behind for several weeks and I finally stopped screwing all of the aesthetic things and moved into building in React. So, I share screen, sorry about that. So, I've started the code, got into it. This was all just today, trying to move on for it. And I actually found out I originally started with this as a match page to this as a, I'm sorry, this is right near it, as a match page. And then I found out that there's actually an NPM for the Tinder swipe cards, and it'll give you the framework for it, and you're just applying all of the events and all of that. So right now, that's as far as I've gone. I have the, oh, I'm hitting buttons here. Put in, I've started it, but I'm hoping to get that off, and I think I'm going to drop the entire COVID thing part of it because it's not done and over with. But let's face it, that's not a big endpoint at this point. So that's where we're at.
Awesome, thanks, Ariel. All right, next up, Brandy. If you want to go ahead and share any updates you have in your capstone.
Yep. I don't have much visually appealing, but I've started to convert everything into React. The bulk of my app is going to be the card, so I'm just working on getting the components down and thinking about how to integrate what I'm doing now into what we're doing right now. So working on this so that I can utilize this model later on, this module later on. So yeah, again, this is all React right now. I have a problem that I'm gonna fix with carousel, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
Awesome, thanks, Brandy. All right, next up, Brielle, if you want to give an update on your project.
So I am making progress, switching everything over to React. I'm not quite done, but I'm happy with where I'm at. And I've started to try to develop my own test database based off of.
What? I'm still on.
I think it's pretty incredible that we've gotten through 2/3 of the program and had our first hot mic incident.
I think we might have lost you, Brielle.
Everything's frozen, yeah.
Brielle, can you hear us? Otherwise, I'll circle back with her at the end. Put in the chat. Can anyone else hear Brielle, or is it just me?
No,
Yeah.
we all lost her.
Frozen, yeah.
I'll put a note in the chat and I'll circle back with her at the end. I assume she'll try to rejoin in a minute here. So with that, Dominique, if you want to go ahead and go next, and I'll circle back with Brielle.
Absolutely. Let me show my screen. I really didn't do too much. I was really moving everything over from my HTML over to React. So I really don't have much to show, but I have been doing a lot of research. So I'll show you a few websites that have been helping me when it comes to my context. Click and Snap. I have noticed that if you are somebody who does a lot of photography or does a lot of artwork, that they do pay per view. So it's 40 cents per view. Pretty much if you get like 38 views, the payout's $15. So that's something that maybe somebody's interested in. The next site is Kimura, which it does updates for any type of videos, like resizes. Then you have Contact Drips, which you probably see this on Instagram a lot, where right here they do like a lot of slides. So this is probably something that somebody might be interested in it with their contacts. And one of my favorites is ncs.io, which is a free website for free music downloads. So if, like for me, I do videos for my artwork. So I've been using this site a lot just for like the feedback and just the video music on top of my artwork. So that's all I have for right now. Just been doing research.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Dominique. All right. Next up, we have Alina, but I don't believe I saw her in the chat. So I'll circle back with her if she joins in a minute here. Next up, we have Phobilia. If you'd like to share anything for today.
Oh, sure. Max was helping me get the navigation bar under control, especially with the drop-down box. So that's looking pretty good right now. I'm using my name will be my logo. So I have a font that looks good. And my next phase, I'll be adding some pictures to the pages and still trying to work out things with the linking of some of the pages.
Awesome. Thanks, Phobilia. Appreciate you sharing.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Kyle. Kyle, if you want to give an update.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I selected my tour stops. I have 3, possibly 4 sites. I may end up combining 2 into kind of one because they're near each other. And I've gotten some research done on all of those as well. And then I have been working with Google Maps, trying to get like a basic test up, and I had some success today. So this is my map. I made it in regular JavaScript so that it would match the example code in Google. And I have the markers labeled for, I have like a fake marker here. I put it at common space for like where the person is right now. And I have 2 sites marked, and I set the sites so that they have like a pop-up window that tells the name, and I can put a description there. And the big thing that I got done today is I was able to make directions between 2 locations. No text yet, but directions like a line. So that was my big project for this weekend. And I also made some notes on how to improve this code generally and like what I want to do with it when I bring it into React, where I have more options. So that's my update.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Awesome work. One thing that Kyle pointed out, I just want to kind of draw attention to. So anytime, you're writing code for your capstone, like don't hesitate to go back, delete a bunch of code, modify it, make it more beautiful. I think, from Dave's presentation last week, hopefully, folks saw some value in that. But like, as you're working through it and you're like, wow, I don't get this code. This code doesn't make sense. Like, don't hesitate to, do a complete refactor. There's a lot of, you'll learn a ton just by going through old code. And then, hey, I now know more stuff. I can write better code. So I know it can be like tedious at times, but that's just one thing I'd recommend to everyone, if you have to have the time. But next up, Latanya, if you want to give an update on your capstone. I think you're on mute, Latanya.
Sorry about that. Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
This one, okay. So this is my HTML page, and this is my React. So at this point, this whole component will replace this and go down to meet with the body links. And then this whole component minus this top will go underneath where the right over where the white starts, that's the footer. So at this point, what I'm trying to do is focus on getting the videos to work. Getting the structure like really tight, but yeah, just trying to work out the whole React part of it at this point. I'm really happy that I set up my React app all by myself and that I did all my debugging all by myself. So I know it doesn't look like much, but I put a lot of effort into it. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanya. Thanks for sharing. All right, next up we have Mel. I don't think I saw Mel in the chat, so I'll skip over Mel for now and circle back at the end. So next up, Sarah, would you like to share anything for your capstone?
Yeah, so no real big updates, but I did redo my nav bar here, so I could add more categories that I wanted to showcase. And I added a search function here as well. And then I just made these buttons as kind of markers for the features that I wanted users to have. And then I started doing an account page. So this is what a user would see when they're signed in. It's not finished yet, but all these correspond to the buttons on the event page. And then next steps, I'm going to be working on web scraping. So after a talk with Max this weekend, I have a really good starting point for that. So that's it for now.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. All right. Next up, we have Shaw. Shaw, if you want to give an update.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. So I kind of linked the different pages. I also did a review of my code, deleted some extra codes just in classes to make it short and also look nice. On the contract, I created a form. So the next step would be to create some validations for entering name and email. That's all.
Awesome. Thanks, Shaw. All right, and next up we have Susan. Susan, if you want to share anything for your capstone.
Sure. I have sorry, I have to move this. I'm still like, I want to switch to React, but I haven't even got there yet. And I still need styling. But I have things working, like this jumps to a new page. I have these cards set up. On this one, I put in actually like what would potentially be a thing and got that working. So I was just making the basics so I can feel like I have some like groundwork basically to work with. And then, yeah, just I guess switching it to React and making it look nicer would be my two things I need to do. And I guess learning the database side, because doing all this by hand seems like it would be ridiculous. So that's about it. Every page is just going to look like this. So I've only done the two just because I think I can copy. And I need help with this stuff fitting. And I guess that's it.
Just to jump in there, a reminder that if you would like to move it over to React, that's completely fine, but it's not a requirement of the capstone that you have it in React. And that goes for all the students as well. So if you want to move it over, definitely encourage you to do so. But if you're also like already feeling behind or not feeling caught up, you don't want to add too much more onto your plate of trying to get it into React as well. So just throwing that out there as an option, not just for you, Susan, but for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And that's a really good point. And the same thing goes for, this API unit, right? So, right now we're doing things in Node and Express and whatnot, but, if you want to explore a different type of API like GraphQL with React or something, like that's probably going to be a little crazy for this, but, use whatever you're most comfortable with and whatever you would like to do for your capstone. That's a really good point, Max. All right. Wanted to circle back with Brielle. Brielle, are you still with us?
Yes.
I think we lost you earlier, so I wanted to make sure you had some time. So Brielle, if you want to continue with your update. I think we lost you at like 30 seconds into your update.
No, it's I'm just working on finishing up switching everything to React. I started gathering more images and trying to create a test database with a couple of the items that are going to be on my website. And I'm very excited about starting the website to
That's so good.
change. And anyway, so I'm making good progress. I'm happy with it. So
Awesome. Thank you, Braille. All right, just taking a look at my list here for folks to circle back with. Karen, did you want to present anything today for your capstone update?
Oh, no, Jesse.
Okay, thanks, Karen. All right, folks, I think that's everyone. Looking in chat just to make sure. Yep, that's everyone. All right, awesome work, everyone. Always great to see these updates. Carve out a couple minutes. If everyone has any questions, thoughts, feedback. The one question I'd be curious about, for the folks, I know you just started, the API last week with Max, API module rather. For the folks that are, kind of exploring the React route or they have data, are we sort of seeing how like that data might start to interface with their projects by using like a backend API, even though it's, again, first week, so my answer might be no now, but I'm hoping, as we kind of get through these weeks, you start to see more and more on how you might be able to leverage that. So the answer is no right now, but just curious, even after the first week, folks kind of starting to have some of those light bulb moments like, hey, I can use this data or this API in my project. Feel free to throw it in chat if you like. I'm just curious at kind of where everyone's head's at, if you're using some component with data in your projects. That's one thing I'd be particularly interested in. To an extent, all right. And again, if the answer is no right now, that's totally fine. I'm just curious.
I think where we might be able to start feeling is like, all right, I can see how I could make a fetch request on my front end and have it go to the server. And if my server magically had some way of storing some data in a database, maybe then I could send that data back from the server. So that's kind of what we're teeing up.
Yeah. Which is why I preface it. Yeah. Thank you, Max.
Not that I'm leading the witness on the next 4 weeks or anything.
But any other thoughts or feedback, folks? Questions? Anything at all? Everyone feeling okay? It's awesome to see these updates. So it looks like everyone's tracking along well. And again, we'll be able to provide more detailed feedback on that assignment in Google Classroom. So. All right, any other thoughts, feedback? Going once, going twice. All right, everyone, with that, I'll hand it back over to Max and Caitlin. So everyone have a very rest of your night. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ping me on Slack. Thanks, everyone.
So we will get to stand up in a second, but today is going to feel a little bit like a ping pong ball. We are going to bounce all over. So we've got a couple things coming down the pipeline. Latonia has been gracious enough to talk a little bit about VS Code Workspaces and how you can start configuring your VS Code to kind of maintain your projects and keep track of multiple things. So we're going to give Latonia 5 to 15 minutes to kind of do a quick screen share through that, talk through what the benefits of VS Code Workspaces are and stuff like that. And then I will circle back to the rest of what we're covering. But Latonia, I'll hand the floor over to you. I lied. One other thing, if there are any other topics that you guys as students have stumbled on, are finding really beneficial, would like to share with the rest of the class, feel free to ping me, 5 to 15 minutes at the beginning of class just to show something that you've learned. I'm happy to give the floor over for that. But I will hand it over to Latonia now.
Thank you. Can you all see a blank screen?
Yep.
Okay. So like Max said, I'm just going to walk us through how you would create a workspace. And initially I had asked him about it because I thought it was something we could use just to make sure our workspace was set up when we came back to class. But you may have figured out by now that Visual Code kind of does that automatically for us. There is a preserve feature that I'll share later that you can go in and click just to kind of make sure that your workspace will be set up the way you had it, but essentially it does do some stuff for us automatically. So with that said, VS Code does automatically generate a workspace anytime you're working in the editor. Workspaces are really helpful if you're working on like large projects or on team projects, but it also has this thing where you can set up special features for your workspace. So you can follow along if you want to, but I'm going to share the steps later on. Essentially what you would do is, I'm just going to start a new window. So you will go into File, Open. Basically, you want to go wherever you're going to store your workspace. So for me, I started a folder that's just called Workspaces. So in here, I'm going to start a new one. I'm just going to call it Test Space. Create it. It'll open. And you want to go to File and do Save as Workspace. A file should pop in after you name it. And we're just going to call it Test. And this tells you that it's a workspace. If you click it, you can see it's just a path. Actually, it opened up different this time. But before I had to right click, and you can see it's a JSON file in there. That's how they keep track of the different files that you put in. So I'm just going to click Save so I don't lose that. And I'm going to go up and I'm going to add folder to the workspace. So now you would just go wherever you have your code stored. So I'll just go in here and just pick one. And it should populate in here. Hopefully this has some stuff in here. Okay, interesting. Sorry about that. I'm going to go to code. And there's some stuff in here. So you can see I'm just adding in different ones. So we have stuff in here. Get rid of it. And you can see we just have, I'll just open up the index file so you can see some stuff. So now I'm clicking Save again because I don't want to lose anything. And then what you can do is just go back to Code, Preferences, and Settings. And once you're in here, you're going to click on Workspace. And so now whatever you do is going to be specific to that workspace. So I'll just put, I'll just enter color theme so I can show you that I'm going to change the color theme, which is right here. So I'm just going to pick anyone. So you can see I'm doing a save. And so now that's the theme for that particular folder, not my regular purple one that I use. But the special thing about this is that you can go in and you can do anything. You know how we do the exclamation mark tab and it populates that head code for us in our HTML file. You can do, you can set it up where your workspace is like React specific. And you can go in and do RFE tab and it'll put in that import React statement for you, just, you know, in a couple clicks. So I'm just going to go back in so you can see this is that file again. You double click it and it's just going to open up and you're in there. There's just a lot of stuff that you can do with Workspaces. So that was pretty much it. I had a couple other things, like if you do Command B, it opens up your sidebar. So you see how we're in here, I'm clicking Command B and it got rid of it. So that's good if you want extra space while you're working and you can't get to your, you know, to the sidebar to click and drag it. You can just do Command B and it'll just pop open, pop close, and what have you. So just hopefully some helpful tips about working with workspaces and stuff that we can do to be more efficient in our workflow.
So basically you could set up a workspace for your capstone project, or you could set up another workspace for your capstone pre-React transition, or you could set up a workspace for every individual week. And that way, when you're leaving files open, when you close it, go to another project, you're working on it, when you come back to that other workspace, it's going to have the right files open. It's going to remember, you know, oh, I have my files open split screen. It could be how you can start bridging the gap between your front end and your back end. So if you don't like two separate VS Code windows, and you like keeping all of your files over on the side, you could add your front end and back end folders to the same workspace, save it, and then easily be able to jump back to that. So it's kind of like saving everything in VS Code into one configuration file. Excuse me. So one thing you may not know is VS Code is actually made all in JavaScript. It uses a framework called Electron. And Electron is like a framework similar to React or Express, in that it lets you build desktop class apps as a web app, as you would in JavaScript. So there are actually versions of VS Code that run right in the web browser, which is really cool because that unlocks you being able to use VS Code on something like an iPad. Really cool stuff. Definitely you may want to lean into Workspaces if you find yourself opening the same files over and over again. Totally worthwhile investment to get them set up. Whenever I get a new computer, I take at least a day off, if not two, because one, you've got to get your development environment all set up, right? So you've got to get all of your database servers installed in Node and, get the configuration right, move your files over. But then there's all those little nitpicky settings of, I want my spaces to be a little smaller, or, I use a different font, or all of these things that you've tweaked over time that you forget about when you get on a new computer. And so some of them you can migrate. Sometimes you go, oh, well, I get a new computer only every, a couple of years or whatever. So sometimes it's worth setting that all up from scratch and kind of having a clean slate. But I am very particular. I believe Latonia asked me on my window setup of, what I put where. And so workspaces are a great way, especially if you're switching between a lot of different projects, to be able to retain all of that and not have to do it from scratch every time. Awesome. Any questions for Latonia or me on workspaces? Cool. And like I said, if anyone has stumbled into something that they think would be useful for the other students, feel free to hit me up, and I'm happy to block out a couple minutes at the beginning of class to let you guys present that. So with that said, back to the ping pong ball, we are going to briefly cover what a Git Ignore file is, and we're going to set up what we call a global Git Ignore file to ignore node modules on any of your Git repos. And so the reason why we are going to do a Git Ignore on node modules is because all the information your application needs to run is in the package.json file, right? And so whenever we run npm install, what it is doing is it is going to that package.json file. It's reading through not only all the packages that you have added, but all the version numbers as well. And then it's loading them up into the node modules folder. Well, that node modules folder gets really big because it's got all of those packages sitting in it. So traditionally, when you share a project or a Git repo with a fellow developer, it is you want to share all of your code, but not all of the packages code. So you send them that, you send them your package.json file, and then when they open it up, they know to just run npm install and pull everything down from npm instead of having to transfer all of the stuff that you have installed on your computer. So we are going to set up a global Git Ignore. There are at least two kinds of Git Ignores. I can't definitively say there are not more than two, but if you put a .git ignore file in any repository at the top level, Git will literally ignore any of those files that we are referencing in that Git Ignore. However, we can tell Git, hey, we created this file and we want to configure Git, no matter what repo we're using on our computer, to ignore node modules. With that said, Git Ignore does not ignore files once they are tracked. And what I mean by that is once we have added those files to the repo and committed them, Git doesn't use the Git Ignore file. It goes, nope, you are added those files in. I am going to to keep them and still track them. So if you make any changes, I don't care that it's in the Git Ignore, I'm going to keep rolling with it. So for any projects from here on out, as long as we have our global Git Ignore set up, it will be ignored on all projects. But the same syntax and principles that we're using in the global Git Ignore file go for project level Git Ignore files as well, which are a little bit more common. And you may notice that when we did a Create React app actually already sets up a Git repository for us. And they have a Git Ignore file. So if you go into any of the Create React app folders that we have created, there will be a little file in there called .git ignore. And so if you pop that open, there's a long list of things, but one of the things in there is node modules. And that is why you may have noticed your Git repo for React is actually a little bit smaller than the node repos or some other things we've created, because Git is actually being smart and not adding node modules in. So I'm going to do that in a second. From there, we are going to shift over to Khan Academy. And so we're going to change it up a little bit. I am not the best teacher for SQL. I do not use SQL in my day-to-day job. I use databases in my day-to-day job, but I use a tool that we will be covering in the second half of the module, which is kind of how you practically integrate a database into your node code. With that said, I did take SQL as a high school student, actually, at a local community college, and we spent 2 full semesters learning database design, which was 1 semester, and then switching over to SQL programming, which is how to use the SQL programming language to implement your data design and run queries and all of that stuff. So my job is to take 2 semesters worth of content and shove it down into 2 weeks. And so for that very reason, I realized I shouldn't be reinventing the wheel here. And so what we're going to do is use a link called Khan Academy. Khan Academy is becoming very popular in schools now, where the teacher will actually say, watch these videos for your homework, and then do your homework in class with me. So when you have questions, I can help you through it. So we're going to try and change up the pace a little bit. I'm going to be screen sharing. We'll play those videos. We will take a break, let everyone do the exercises, and then the homework will be the projects at the end. So I am hoping to play those videos, add in some commentary after the videos, answer any questions. We'll do the tutorial or the little exercise, and then we'll go on to the next video once everyone in the poll says they're ready to go. So this should feel like a giant change of pace for you, not only because we're using a new learning resource, but because we won't be writing any JavaScript in the next at least 2 days, if not the whole week. We are going to be solely in database land, and database land is going to exist in its own little island until we intentionally start bringing Node back in and connecting that all through. I'm thinking that will probably take the whole day. I've got some things planned out after that, but to give you a preview of the rest of the week, once we have our database SQL fundamentals down, we're going to talk a little bit about database design and how we structure our data to properly save into a database, to make it queryable, to don't repeat yourself, to do all of that kind of stuff. From there, we are going to integrate our SQL with Node and start figuring out how we can get data back, and do a brief little example of Bobby tables. I don't think any of you will get that reference, but we're going to talk a little bit about SQL injection and how if you are not careful, an end user can delete all of your data from your database without you intending to allow them to do that. So we're going to do a brief example on that, and I'm thinking that will probably take us to the end of the week. If we have time, we will go to the Messages app and start layering in how we would use SQL to get our messages to work. Next week, we are going to talk about this magical thing called an ORM, an Object Relational Mapper, which is going to map all of our JavaScript objects to SQL code that is going to interface with the data and make data flow back and forth more easily. And that is what is my bread and butter. That is what I use at work all the time. Our database has roughly 40 or 50 tables in it, which is actually a small number for databases. We have somewhere between 2 or 3 million rows in our database of all different kinds of IDs and content, how it's all associated together, how we model out that data and design our database to make sure that it is structured properly, make sure it's searchable, make sure that it is relatable. So anyway, that should be a preview of what is coming up. But before I forget, I'm going to do a quick example on Git Ignore. I'm going to lean into using the terminal just so you guys don't fall out of your terminal practice. Some basic commands that we should know. And then I'm going to do a quick slide presentation on the database, and then we will get going in Khan Academy. With all of that said, I am breaking every rule on stand-up order. Someone summarize what we did last week. What did we learn? What was a light bulb moment? What felt cool? All of that good stuff. And feel free to throw it in the chat if you don't want to unmute as well. You learned nothing. I had you for a whole week. I have you for another 4 weeks, and you learned nothing. I fried your brains. That's it. We're done.
Hi, Max. This is Shah. For me, Linko connecting the backend with front end, that was really cool. I mean, I know we've been working on that, but to actually see and send codes and data to one another was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard. I know I tried with ngrok and that blew up miserably in my face, which happens more frequently than you would like as a developer. But I think it's kind of hard to appreciate that abstraction of not only are we sending data from one server or one computer to another, but that seems overcomplicated, but it is setting us up to be able to send that data over the internet, right? And be able to have multiple users all talking to one server to keep track of all of that. So yeah, definitely a huge accomplishment to get all of that working and see data going back and forth. And by the end of next week, not only are we going to be saving that data, but we're going to be able to save that data to the database and actually add a third layer to our stack. So we will have 3 servers up and running and storing information and sending that back and forth. So really cool stuff, and a lot that we're covering in the next couple weeks.
The other thing that I learned or realized during the weekend was that it's easier to debug with NPM. Like I had a lot of problems with Node during the weekend. I was working Friday, so I had to delete, reinstall, do global, still it wouldn't. So I said, yeah, let's try npm start versus npx nordman. So that gives me the message that I could easily debug. So I did that. Then after I fixed that, I went and reinstalled the npx nordman, and it worked.
Awesome. Yeah. Packages are very interesting because you normally don't have a problem with the package. You have a problem with the package that uses a different package as a dependency, and it's that dependency that's causing the issue. So definitely using stack traces as your friend. You know, when you get an error, it does not throw this computer out the window because I'm so frustrated. It's, hey, let's figure out what this error is telling me, because oftentimes what the error isn't helpful. It's where the error is that it's helpful. So reading that stack trace and trying to figure out what it's trying to tell you, definitely a good skill to practice and pick up. Anything else from last week? Anything that clicked in the homework for you? Anything that you want to share with anyone else? Okay. In that case, I am going to get us started on our Git Ignore. So I am going to pop open a new terminal. I'm going to kick off my screen sharing. So in order to tell our Git that we want to ignore a file, we first need to create that file. And so it is common practice. I'm in my terminal. Let me blow up the text a little bit. And so I am going to run a quick PWD. If you want to do this in VS Code, that's completely fine. I happen to open the terminal application, but wherever you're more comfortable. I'm going to run a PWD, and you can see I'm in my users Max Matthews folder. If you are in VS Code, you may be in a different project folder. So the way we can get back to our home folder is we can CD and do a little tilde, which is shift and then the key next to the number 1 on the keyboard. And that tilde always is a shortcut for basically saying jump to our home folder. So if I run that and run PWD, you can see I am in my home folder. Now, this is a file that we don't really want to live in a project, right? We want this to be global. So where are we going to store that? Well, it is common to store everything in a folder called developer. So if I ls, you can see here are all the different files that I have in my home folder. If you have a folder called developer already, we can just CD into our developer folder. And if we run our PWD again, we can see our developer path. If you try and CD into your developer folder and it says no such folder, what I can do is, again, make sure I'm in my correct location, and I can run mkdir space, and then the folders are typically capitalized in your home directory. So make sure you give it a capital D and spell out developer. Now, if I run this, it's going to throw an error for me and it says file already exists. It's really a folder. But all we are doing is creating our developer folder. So I'm going to CD from there into my developer folder and run a PWD just again to make sure that I'm in my folder. From there, I want to create a new file. And so to create a blank file, we run a command called touch. And we are going to call that file .gitignore _global. So I'm going to hit enter on that, and that just creates a file for me. So if I run ls, you can see here are all the folders that I have in my developer folder, or all the files, folders and files, I guess. But I just created my gitignore global, and it's not in here. So what we actually have to do is run ls space LA. And what that is going to do is say list all the files, because any file that starts with a period by default on the Mac is a hidden file. So it's just not going to show up. So we have to use that LA tag to show that my file is actually there. It's actually showing up.
You have a dash before the LA?
I do.
Okay.
And so if you LSLA, hopefully you see your .gitignore global. Now we could do all of this in VS Code, but hopefully this is a little refresher on the command line for you, because we do eventually need to tell our Git in the terminal to globally gitignore this. So now that I'm in here, we can actually use a text editor that is built right into the terminal. Now, you may have heard of Emacs, EMACS, or Vim, VIM. There are battles raged over whether Emacs or Vim is better, just like there are battles raged over whether tabs or spaces are better in files. And so what I'm actually going to do is use one that is smaller than Vim and Emacs, and it is called Nano. Nano, because it is literally a very tiny, lightweight text editor that is much easier to use. So I'm going to run Nano and then my .gitignore global. And remember, you can use tab for your autocomplete. So if you do nano space period git and hit tab, chances are it's going to autocomplete your git ignore file for you. Now I'm going to hit enter here, and I am now in my nano text editor. So we have some commands that we can run down here at the bottom. And then this is where I can literally type anything, and it's going to be in the file. So to just play around with nano for a second, I'm going to hit Control O, and that is going to say, what do you want the file name to write to? And so we're going to hit enter there, and that's what saves the file for me. So when we say write, it literally just means save. And then I'm going to hit Control X, and that's going to get me out of the text editor. We can then use a command called tail and do my .git ignore global, and it will actually print out whatever the last couple lines of the file are. So I'm going to go back in. I'm going to nano my .git ignore global, and I'm going to get back into my text editor, and I'm going to delete out the word type or whatever you put in there. And I am going to say node _ modules. And all that is going to do is that's going to say whatever is in node modules, git ignore it. And so I'm going to Control O again. It's going to say, what do you want to call that file name? I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to save the file. And then I'm going to hit Control X, and that gets me out of my nano editor. Okay, now we've got our git ignore, but we've got to tell Git, hey, this is a global git ignore. I want you to apply this to every repo. So what I am going to do is run a command, which I am going to copy and paste into Zoom and Zoom and Slack. I will put it in the pasted code channel. And so I'm going to just paste that in, but we are basically saying, let me put that up on the screen. We're using the git command, and we all know we've got git installed, because if we didn't, we wouldn't be able to pull the classroom repo and all of that stuff. We're using the config command, and we're saying, hey, there is a global file. This happens to apply to the core of Git, like this is baked into Git, and it's an excludes file, and what it's going to exclude is anything in there. So now any new repo that you create should, in theory, be ignoring anything in your node modules folder. I'm going to launch a poll and see how many people were able to follow along, or if anyone got an error, feel free to shout it out. Or if anyone has questions on what git ignore is supposed to be doing or anything like that. You will definitely have cranky developers yelling at you if you ever commit a node modules into a repo, because it's taking a repository with only, a couple lines of code in it and this nice lightweight repo under a megabyte, and node modules makes it like 250 meg. And you may even notice that Git starts complaining and says, there are some huge files in this repository. Something may not be configured properly. And so adding in those git ignore and applying it globally can be helpful. Also knowing that you would need to remove that file or remove out the node modules line in that file if you ever wanted to git ignore, if you didn't want to ignore your node modules. And you can also just add an enter and keep adding to that file, and it will continue to git ignore whatever is in whatever is in there. Okay, any questions before I move on?
So I think I'd like to put those DS store files in mine too.
Great idea.
Can I just go back in there? I don't have to, like, anything I add to that file now will.
Correct. So we can nano our git ignore. We just want to get our cursor to the right spot. So you use your arrow keys to move the cursor around. And then we are going to say .ds_store. And it's really important that you get the casing correct, because on, I never get this right. On the Mac, the casing matters, but on Windows, it doesn't, or vice versa. So I can't remember which one it is, but it is important to get the casing right. I'm pretty sure it is D $S_S for store. And so if we hit Control-O, that's going to give us the ability to hit Enter to save, and then Control-X to exit. Now you may say, Max, why would I ever want to use Nano when I've got beautiful VS Code that lets me use the mouse? Well, you may be on a server. And when you're on a server, you can't just edit the files on the server. You're in the server on a terminal. And so that's when having something like Nano is super helpful. So you can edit the files right on the server without having to connect in through VS Code and get that connection working and all of that stuff. I'm just going to scroll up. Yeah, it is D $S_, and then S for this store. And that is a very popular one to add as well. Node modules and DS store for a JavaScript developer may be the most popular two to add to a git ignore. And DS store is a file that I believe Finder uses under the hood to index some files. And so whenever you hit like Command Space and you start using Spotlight, I'm pretty sure that's what DS store uses. It is something related to the Mac because Windows does not create DS store files. But if you want to learn more about that, feel free to Google it. And there are all kinds of articles about that. Oh, and by the way, in an effort to show you that I do not know everything off the top of my head, all I did is I did a search for Git Ignore Global, and I'm sure the documentation in GitHub would be helpful, but sometimes there is a little bit more in the documentation than what you are looking for, or it is hard to find the information in the documentation. In this case, it probably isn't, and they actually are helping us out in showing us, what command we need to run on our Mac to get that to work. But Stack Overflow is your friend as well. And this Stack Overflow has over 1,000 upvotes, which is a very good sign. Anything in probably above 25 upvotes is pretty safe to use. And so they are also telling me, you see, the *NIX means Linux or Unix. And the Mac is based off of Linux. So that is why we run this command right here. Okay. Any questions on that? Not the end of the world if you don't do it. No one's going to yell at you now if you've got your node modules in a Git repository. But as you add more and more packages and that grows and you create more and more repositories down the road, that can get a little messy. So the local project level Git Ignore, as Create React App shows us, very powerful, fine to use that. And one will not override the other. So if you've got a global Git Ignore file, and you also have a project level Git Ignore file, those two will merge together, and Git will know, hey, ignore everything at the global level or the computer level, and then also ignore anything at the project level too.
Excuse me, Max.
Yep.
How would you check to see if it was already installed on your computer? The whole global, like, is there something?
Yeah, good question. You can use the Git Config. Let me see if I can remember that off the top of my head. Yeah, so if you run Git Config --list and hit enter on that, you can see here are all of the things that I have in my Git config. And this probably isn't a good example. Let me see if I can do. Okay, so I'm going to run git config get and then core.excludes file. And that will tell me, hey, that is where I've got my git ignore global set up. Any other questions? Okay, I am going to pop open the slides that I posted at 5:35 in the Zoom chat, and I also posted it in the student resources channel. You don't have to pop them open. There's nothing that I'm going to be like I'm going to be copying and pasting or anything, but if you want to follow along on your own computer, you can. These are slides Gus used when he taught the same module in Cohort 1. So total credit to Gus for most of these slides. So let's talk about databases, data modeling, and ORMs, because I am not a huge slides person and have not taught off slides before, but I think visuals help here. So let's talk about the chat app. We got the chat app working, but it was just going into a regular JavaScript object and array, right? Nothing new there. Yeah, we stored it on the server, but we've already proven that we can take our data structure that we had on our front end, borrow that, and put it right on our back end. But what we saw is that as soon as that server reboots, as soon as we just make a change to the file, that array gets cleared out, right? And so that wouldn't work very well in the real world. Our server may be running all the time, but if there's a power outage, all of a sudden our data disappears. So we actually didn't build this into the API, but we could have actually theoretically saved our messages array out into a separate file, right? Just like we save a Word document on our computer, we could save our messages into a file called messages.json. And when the server turns off or reboots or whatever happens, it could pull that file from the hard drive. But now we run into a problem of what happens when we need to scale? What happens when we have so many people accessing our messages server that we need to have multiple servers running ready to handle those messages? Well, now all of a sudden, server 1 has one messages.json file and server 2 has another one, and we can't keep those in sync very easily. So we run into an issue of, well, when we have multiple backend servers running, we have to keep that file in sync, and files keeping in sync get messy very quickly. And so we could have that load endpoint, right? But we have trouble keeping it all in sync. So in comes the database to save the day. So database, a basic computer program tends to be called a database server because we are spinning up another server. And because it's on a server, it means it has its own port that it is running on, just for storing and retrieving data. Usually it's its own server, but it is possible to have multiple servers running parallel to each other, just like we had our React server and our Node server running. When we start doing our local development, we are going to have a third server running now for our database. It is possible that you don't actually have direct access to that server and pay one of the cloud providers to manage and configure and scale that server for you. So instead of having to set it all up yourself, you can say, hey, Amazon, I would like a database server. And they'll say, no problem, we'll optimize that for you. Here's how you connect to it. You don't need to worry about it. It automatically saves your data to the hard drive and manages everything behind the scenes. So you're never going to go onto the hard drive and pull data out of the database. You are going to use SQL to do that. And most databases allow you to write data at the same time. So there is a way that multiple servers, like we just talked about, can connect to one database and interface that data back and forth. Okay, so this is what a standard server looks like, a standard stack. We have actually already covered 1 and 4, right? So we have our client. Our client is just loading up the website. Could be your laptop, could be anyone going to your web app, whoever it is. First step is it does the fetch request to the server, which is expressed in Node right now. Well, the server has a constant connection open to our database. We're going to be using a database called Postgres. There are lots of other SQL variants. The other most popular one is called MySQL. Oracle and Microsoft are the other 2 major names, but those are paid databases. MySQL and Postgres are free, and they are mostly, if not entirely, open source. Oracle actually bought out MySQL, but still maintains it as an open source server project. And so you can actually, if you were really interested, dig into the source code behind Postgres or MySQL and see how the whole database works under the hood. That is not something that I have ever done, and it is a new level of computer science expert. So I'm not encouraging you to do that, but if you actually wanted to, you could. It's open source. So anyway, the server, our backend API Express server, is going to run a query to send to the database. And it's going to say, hey, database, I would like the students, or I would like the students in the database, where this condition is true. And so what the database is going to do through its own proprietary connection is going to send it back to the server and go, here is the data. So Express now has that data. We can format it, we can validate it, we can only pull out the information that we want. And then we are going to using our response, respond to the rec that came in from 1 and send the data back to our front end. Now using React, we happen to take that data and put it in our state. And because we were using React, it reacted to our state change, showed the content. But this works for any front-end framework, right? The beautiful thing about using JSON as your data going to and from the server is that it doesn't matter what front end you're building it in, and it doesn't matter what back end you're building it in. JSON is an agreed upon standard. And so our data kind of flows from our React app or our front end over to Express. Express asks the database for the data. The data comes back into Express. We can do whatever we want here, and then we send the data back to the client. We'll take a second and pause for questions. Okay. So this is getting a little bit more complicated. We probably won't be covering this much in this module at all, and I doubt that we'll really be covering it in the DevOps module. But when you start to scale your application, what you find is that you need more servers running. And so there is this notion of a load balancer, and a load balancer's only job is to literally balance the load across multiple servers. So what it is doing is it's saying, oh, you would like api.facebook.com. Well, if we ran all of that on one server, the server would be ginormous, right? We need multiple servers to support all the API requests coming in. And so all of facebook.com, for their API, they have one load balancer, and all that load balancer's job is to figure out which server to send it to. And so there are all different ways of configuring these load balancers. You can say, oh, send this request to a server that is actually geographically closest to you. There are ways of saying, just randomly send it to a server, but because we're sending it to 10 different servers, that load is going to be spread across it. And we can actually get super advanced and have our backend servers reporting how many requests are coming in and what load they are under. And then the load balancer can use that information for new requests coming in to determine where it should send this request. But basically, the idea here is we have one load balancer that could send the request to multiple backend servers. And those backend servers would then go to one giant database server to process all of that data. Because it turns out what is hardest on the computer isn't storing the data or retrieving the data or updating the data. It's dealing with all of the incoming connections and doing all the backend processing between the database and the front end. And so that's why we tend to scale our backend servers before we tend to scale our databases. But to the point earlier, without a database, if we were saving the files on each individual server, there would be no way to keep them in sync, right? So the database server just becomes the central repository, the ultimate source of truth, where we store any data. And Carolyn, yes, it is basically switching between the different servers. And then all of those backend servers, all of those independent Express servers would connect into the database. As a junior developer, you're not going to be expected to know scale forwards, backwards, how to optimize your code, how to set up multiple servers. In the DevOps module, we are going to teach you how to deploy your code, but we won't do a super in-depth, okay, now my code is running for 1 million different people. How do I support all of that? If you are scaling that quickly, everyone thinks their project is going to take off, but in actual reality, it takes time for that to happen. Ariel, good question. How does a CDN work, or content delivery network? A content delivery network is typically used for static assets. So it isn't for the backend, but it would be for something like images, or the clearest example that you guys have probably used as a CDN so far is Bootstrap. And so Bootstrap, when we pull the Bootstrap code, if we all went to getbootstrap.com, that server would get overloaded right away, right? So that is behind a load balancer, which CDNs also use. And that load balancer actually figures out what server is closest to you, and then returns the assets from that. So even though you're going to cdn.getbootstrap.com, that isn't always going to the same server to retrieve it. It's going to the same load balancer every time. That load balancer, based off of your IP address, is saying, oh, you're closest to this file in New York City, so we're going to go get it from New York City instead of going out to maybe a server in Los Angeles and sending that back to you. So the beauty of a CDN, any kind of files work well behind a CDN. So images are the most common. Static HTML files, files that aren't changing due to a database, which are most websites, or a lot of websites. And then JavaScript code, like a framework, React, Bootstrap, any of those, all tend to be assets that we put behind a CDN. Things that don't change basically go behind a CDN. Great question. And very similar to a load balancer. Any other questions? Okay. So we are going to get into those later. So that is all I have for you. This is not actually the homework. This is a slide from Gus that I forgot to tweak. Okay. So we are going to switch over to Khan Academy, unless anyone has questions. So this Khan Academy link is in the Zoom chat. And this is the first time we're running through Khan Academy. So I will be curious to see what your daily feedbacks are today. I'm going to stop sharing my whole screen and share just the tab in hopes that it will share better.
The world is full of data.
You
Every
guys hear
app that
that?
you use is full of data. On Khan Academy, we store data about users and badges and progress. On Facebook, they store data about who you are, who your friends are, what they're posting. On Bank of America, they store data about how much money you have and what accounts that's in. How do these apps store data? Well, they use a database, which is a program that helps store data and provides functionality for adding, modifying, and querying that data, and doing that all fast. Databases come in many forms, but a really popular type of database is called a relational database. It stores each kind of data in a table, which is kind of like storing data in a spreadsheet. A row represents an item, and a column represents properties about that item. For example, to store data about Khan Academy users, we'd have a users table with a row for each user and columns for properties like their nickname and location. Relational databases make it particularly easy to form relationships between tables. For example, in order to store Khan Academy users and their badges, we might have a users table and a badges table, and then a user badges table to remember which users earned which badges, just by mapping user IDs to badge IDs. That's a more efficient form of storage than having to repeat everything about the user and everything about the badge in the user badges table. Most databases come with a query language to interact with the database. SQL is a language designed entirely for accessing databases and is the most popular of them. With SQL, we can create tables, change data, get back to data that we're interested in, like we want to find out which users joined in the last week or which users have a particular badge. That's what we're going to teach here, and you'll actually get to try out SQL here in the browser using SQLite, a particular implementation of it. You won't be able to write the whole app here, but when you're done learning SQL, you'll have a much better understanding of how data is stored in the apps that you use and be able to use SQL if you ever build an app.
One thing I forgot to mention, this is all, you have to be careful about copyright. And so Khan Academy is all licensed with a Creative Commons license that allows us to reuse this content in our own YouTube videos. However, YouTube is notoriously strict on copyright. So if this live video is not available on the Hack Upstate channel tomorrow, it is because YouTube flagged it and I need to go in and tell it, hey, this Khan Academy has actually licensed this content, so we're allowed to play it in our own videos. But this is all Khan Academy. I'm not taking any credit for this. And it's all available for free on Khan Academy if you want to go through this, which you guys should pull up, because after this video, there's going to be a challenge that we're going to pause and allow everyone to complete. So if you go back up to the Zoom chat at 5:35, the Khan Academy link is in there.
Welcome to my database. It has no data in it yet because I want to build it up with you. What sort of data should we store in our first table? Let's start with a grocery list, which you've probably used in real life. I'm pasting an example list, which has 3 delicious items and how much we want to buy of each of them. Our first bit of SQL will be the command to make the table to store this list. I'll write create table in all caps, and then the name of the table, groceries, and then parentheses and a semicolon. We see an error pop up because the SQL interpreter expects to see column names inside these parentheses. What column should we have in order to describe each item on our list? Well, first we need a name for the item, which I'll call name, and we need to follow that with a data type. We have a few options. Let's go for text. If we look on the right-hand side, we can see our new table is listed with 1 column. But we also need to specify how many of each thing to buy, like our 4 bananas. So let's add a quantity column as well. And this will always have a whole number, so let's use an integer for that data type. And now we can see that new column listed in our table. That looks pretty good if we're thinking about what data we have in this grocery list, but we're missing something that we need in databases, a unique identifier for each row. We almost always need unique IDs for each row in a database because we need a way to identify rows later when we're updating or deleting them and not be dependent on other columns because those could change. We typically specify this ID column first. So I'm moving my cursor before name. I'll call this column ID, that's standard. And then for the data type, I'll have to write this phrase, integer primary key, which signals to the database that it should treat this as the row identifier and that each row must have a unique value for this column. Okay, now we have our groceries table with 3 columns in it. It's empty though, so let's put some data in it. We'll write insert into, and then the table name, groceries, then values, and then parentheses. And here we start listing the column values in the order that we declared the columns. The first column was ID, so I'll put 1, since we haven't used that ID yet. The second column is name, so I'll write bananas. And the third column was quantity, so I'll write 4. Do you see how the schema updated on the right? It now says that there's 1 row in the groceries table, so our insertion worked. Let's add the next 2 items and just doing the same thing. Insert into groceries, values, 2 peanut butter. I would just 1 of those because otherwise I eat too much. And insert into groceries, values, and ID 3. Dark chocolate bars have to be dark. Milk chocolate is not even chocolate. And we'll get 2 of those. Okay, so it says 3 rows, but to really see that the database actually contains data, you can click the table name on the right. This will insert a select statement in your code. And don't worry too much about this now because we'll get to it in the next video. If you want, you can pause the talk through and try clicking the table name yourself to see what happens. That's it. That's all we needed to create our first table and add data to it. It's pretty cool, huh? In the next section, we'll see how to get the data back out of the table in more interesting ways. Welcome to my database. It has no data in it.
Okay, so to summarize that, we did a create table, and with SQL, we can't just insert data in until we tell it what the table is going to be structured as. So in SQL, because it is a structured query language, we need to tell it what kind of data is going to go into that table before we insert any data into it. So we did our create table, we gave it our table name, and then we did this ID integer primary key. And so that's got 3 pieces of information in it. One, we called our column ID, which is a very standard name. Databases like IDs more than any other kind of data structure because we can use that data not only to pull out that one specific row from the database, but we can start using that ID to associate that or create a relationship with that row to a different row in a different table. And when we get into data modeling, we're going to see the benefits of doing that. So 3 things here. We've got our name of the column. We make sure it is an integer. In SQL, the ID number is almost always an integer, and that's something that the database generates on its own. And so in order to get it to do that, we use this primary key. And so we'll see down the road when we get into Postgres how the database will automatically create that ID for us. But for now, we are passing it in when we do our insert statements. So we repeat that, right? We do a comma to let it know, hey, we would like another column coming in there. We call that column name and we make it a text column. And then finally, we create our quantity and we make an integer just like we made our ID an integer. So over here in Khan Academy, you can see the database schema. The schema is just the table structure, right? And that's a common schema table structure vernacular that you can remember. And then finally, we needed to get some data into our table. So we say insert into, we say what table we want to add it into, we say values, and then do parentheses, and whatever is in our values is going to line up with whatever our column types were. We did 3 inserts, and then we did our select. Carolyn, the integer does act like an accession number or an increment number. SQL, I think, always calls it an increment number. but different databases may use slightly different terms. You will find that the syntax may change a little bit, or the terminology changes a little bit, but for the most part, any SQL database is going to use terms like primary key or values, insert into, select, all of that stuff. So it's kind of weird that when we run our insert, we don't actually get to see what we inserted. So we have to run yet another query called a select query to pull back what we have inserted into the database. So we're going to take a break and practice this, and then we will take our 7 o'clock break and give you guys a chance to let it all soak in. So I'm going to share this link with you in Zoom and in Slack. I just put it in the pasted code C2 channel. And the objective here is, what are your favorite books? You cannot make a database. You can make a database table to store them in. In the first step, create a table to store your list of books. It should have a column for ID, name, and rating. And so what I really like about Khan Academy is they have a hint up here to get you started. And then they also have this beautiful documentation tab down here. And if you pop that open, it's going to give you some reminders of how you create a table, how you insert data, and how you query it. So once you think you have it working, you can hit your next step button, and that will tell you whether or not you've gotten those steps done or not. So we're going to take a break and let you guys practice this in class. When you do have both steps done, go ahead and say that you have in the Zoom poll. And if you have any questions, or you're getting a syntax error, or you're stuck, holler and you can screen share and we can work through it together.
Excuse me, Max.
Shoot.
I'm sorry, I was looking stuff up, but I don't want to, given our time, I don't want to like push my luck. So for the naming convention, we use an underscore for 2-word names for the table. Okay.
Correct. You
And
can
then-
use camel casing if you want. It's more traditional in SQL to use underscores. But I also know that because people are integrating it with their JavaScript, there's an argument to be made that camel casing is just as effective. So convention says underscores for the database, but that's not to say you can't use camel case.
Okay, and then what about like for the name text alphanumeric? Is that enough?
Text means alphanumeric. There are actually at least 2 different kinds of types depending on what variant of SQL you are using. This variant happens to be called SQL Lite, which is literally the lightest version of SQL that you can be running. And I believe SQL Lite only has a text. So it doesn't matter how long the text is. It doesn't matter if it's letters or numbers or both. They just use the text. Okay. When we get into Postgres, we will find 2 different ways of storing text. One is kind of as a text blob, which has an unlimited length. And then the other one is as a varchar or string, which has a maximum length of 255. But those are probably a little more nuanced than we need to get into right now. And so for SQLite, text is alphanumeric.
Okay, thank you.
It's 7:05 and only one of you have it done. So let's regroup here at 7:30 with the expectation that you have figured this out. And then at 7:30, someone can share their screen and talk through the code and how they got it running and what it's actually doing. So go ahead and take your break now. And then at 7:30, we'll regroup and hopefully you all have it running. And when you do get it running, please go to Zoom and just let me know so I've got an idea of where the class is at. But we will take our break now and see you guys at 7:30.
Hi, Max. A quick question.
Shoot.
So integer, so you can use float as well. Like you can have like a rating of 3.5 or 4. I mean, I did 3.5, like it worked. So for SQL, do you have the data type of integer only, or do you have float as well?
Yes. So it really depends on the variation of the database that you are using. So it's not a agreed upon standard across all of SQL. What the agreed upon standard is that every column has a data type, but the options of what data types you can use are not standardized across all SQL variants. So I will throw a link into the data type supported in SQLite. In SQLite, it happens to be null, integer, which is whole number. They call a real, REAL is their version of a float, or a decimal number. And then they have text, which is just a string, and then a notion of blob. And blob is kind of, it's not going to try and figure out what data type it is. It's just going to take it and let you store it in there. So we will probably only be using integer, real, and text in these examples. But when we get to Postgres, they will have slightly different data types. And we will experience that probably on Wednesday for the first time.
Thank you. And the other thing, this wildcard, we use this star. Is it telling the database to pull everything?
Select all the columns.
Records? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's not telling it to select all the rows, it's telling it to select all the columns. And so in order to filter through and only get certain rows back, we will use a where query, but that is coming up shortly.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm going to stretch my legs. I will be back in a couple minutes if anyone has questions. I am back if anyone has questions.
Excuse me, Matt.
Yes.
I'm trying to spare you from my voice. So I'm done. It says step 1 and 2, they're both green, and I'm clicking next step, and it's not taking me anywhere. Am I supposed to be going somewhere? Or?
Can you share your screen?
No.
If you hit next step, it doesn't do anything.
It didn't. It might make me a liar now that you're looking, but
Yeah, that's all you need. I would throw after that, just run a your insert star from favorite books should be select star from favorite books.
oh, I missed that select right in my notes. Sorry.
And now you've got your data showing up over there. I don't know if it's going to let you go on to the next step or not, but that's the whole assignment.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hey, Max.
Yes.
I accidentally made like 5 tables and I can't figure out how I did it. Like it's telling me I can move to the next step, but when I do, it tells me go back. So I clicked it and I've got like 5 of the same tables.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I have like 5.
Yeah, so it's just because you have all those select statements down at the bottom. So if
I didn't put those in, that did that. So if I got rid of some,
yep,
I still shouldn't have 3 tables. It should just 1. Would make
yeah.
sense. Ah, okay. What is still not correct?
Title title here needs to be called name.
Instead of it has to be the actual key for it.
Yep.
Okay, so if I do it this way.
And then rating should be a lowercase r. Column names are almost always lowercase.
Okay, so oh, well, all right, thanks.
No problem. When you stop screen recording, did that clear off my drawings from your screen?
What do you mean exactly? Like, did it clear it off when I stopped?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing there.
Okay, good. I normally have the ability to clear the drawings. That's the first time that someone had stopped the screen sharing while I had a drawing up there. So I wanted to make sure like it wasn't like stuck on your screen.
No, you're good. Sorry.
Okay.
Max, did you want us to keep going if we're done with the first assignment?
No, we'll keep going as a class together in like 5 minutes. I mean, if you're feeling really ambitious, you can, but I'm going to play the next couple videos and talk through them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Last question. I just got the email to join your class. Are we supposed to be joining that?
Yes, if you could, that'd be great.
Okay.
And if you already have a Khan Academy account, you should be able to use it. But if you need to create a new one, that should also work fine. But I'll go over that in 4 minutes when everyone's back. Zoom hates me. Won't let me launch another poll. Okay, people should be getting back. I'm gonna leave a decision up to you guys. First of all, I imported our Google Classroom into Khan Academy. So you probably got an email to your Gmail email address that will let you create an account. Or if you go to create an account, you should be able to use the class code that I put in the Zoom chat. That in theory will let me see your homework, so you don't need to turn it in on Google Classroom. First time I have used Khan Academy as a teacher. So I'm not quite sure how that experience is going to go, but it's worth creating an account anyway, so you can get back and see your finished code and progress and all of that kind of stuff. And so when you create your account, you should be able to create it with the class code. If you already had one, it looked like it pulled you automatically into our class. So not sure how that is going to work. Feel free to share any feedback along with that process. So going to open up the decision for you guys. If you would rather just go through this at your own pace and then jump in here if you have any questions, that is option one. Option two is to keep going the way we're going, where I'm going to play the video. I'm going to talk about the video a little bit. And then when we hit an exercise, I'll give you guys a minute to complete it as well. So just launch that poll and we'll let you guys decide if you want to go basically at it at your own pace or go through it step by step and have me explain it as we go.
Before I vote, Max, I just have a quick question. So can we expect that the database setup is the same, like how we're inputting the data is the same?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
See, cohort 1, when they went through this program, there was always a decisive output from the polls. You guys are split right down the middle whenever I launch a poll, and it drives me nuts. It's like, why even bother asking? I know exactly what the results are going to be. I will give you guys one more minute to vote. All right, we've got 10 votes in. Hopefully we have a tie-breaking vote that comes in the next minute. Otherwise, we will figure out what we're going to do there. Okay, it is split 50-50. So what I am going to do is I am going to say, if you would like to drop and go through these at your own pace, you are totally welcome to do that now. That no hard feelings, you won't get any attendance marked out off, anything like that. The goal for tonight is to finish the design and store a database assignment. Let me just look. The problem is I'm not sure how far we are going to get. So the end objective by the end of Tuesday is to get through the entire Khan Academy course. So if you're feeling really good and you want to just truck forward, you can go through the entire course. And I will create an assignment on Google Classroom once I figure out whether Khan Academy will let me see your results or not. But you want to complete all of the projects, all of the exercises, and just truck through all of that. If you are getting the videos and want to power through, you can hop out of here. And then when you have any questions, feel free to come back in and ask them. Meanwhile, if you would like to hear me talking through the videos after they do it, we will continue on the pace that we've been doing, which is watch the videos, have me explain it, give you guys a break for the exercises, and then keep going. The only thing I don't know is where we will be at the end of the night pacing wise. But again, the end objective is to get through all of the modules by the end of tomorrow. If you want to pop back in, Ariel, a couple minutes before the end of class, probably a good idea, but not a requirement. I'll shoot out a Slack message to everyone to say this is where we ended in class tonight, and then we'll just pick up here tomorrow. So feel free to drop out now if you would like. Feel free to come back in here if you have any questions, or a couple minutes before 8:30 if there's anything that you would like to review. Otherwise, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and we're going to continue going through the videos and taking breaks for the exercises. Make sense for everyone? Cool. Okay, we are going to move on to querying. Let me share my screen again. And we will kick this off.
We're back with our groceries table, but we've expanded on it a bit. It now has a column for which aisle number we can find the item at the supermarket, plus we've added a few more items. Now you can really see the power of SQL in different ways that you can retrieve data from your database. And this is also where it can get a bit tricky. To start off simple, how would we retrieve all the rows from our table? To perform any query, we write select, and then which columns we're interested in, like the name, and then from, and the table name that we're selecting from. And we can see a list of the groceries on the right under that results section. But what if we want all of the column names? We can just replace name with star. And that was also the query that got inserted when you click the table name, which you might remember from the first talk through. This list is out of order though. If we went from top to bottom at the store with this list, we'd have to keep changing aisles. We'd rather have it ordered by aisle so that we can be more efficient at the store. To do that, we can just add an order by clause to our query, specifying which column we want to order by. Ah, that's better. Now we can get our ingredients faster. But to be even more efficient, my brother and I like to shop together and split the store so that I shop in half the store, he shops in the other half, and we meet at the checkout. There are 12 aisles at this grocery store, so for my list, I just want to know which items are in aisles 6 through 12. Well, anytime we want to filter results out, we can use a where clause for this and specify the column name and then what we want to compare it to. So in this case, I used a greater than operator, but there's lots of different comparison operators depending on what it is we're trying to filter by. Great. So now I know exactly what items I'm going to get. I'm going to be really efficient. And you've learned a few ways to use SQL to query. Now stay tuned to find out even more ways that you can select.
Okay, so we learned a couple new commands there. So we knew the select star means all the columns from and then the table name. but we introduced 2 new keywords into SQL. We did our where, and then we use a column name, our operator, which will largely line up with the operators we use in JavaScript, and then the value that we want to check. And then we also learned about the order by, which is taking a column name and automatically sorting that for us. Okay, so I'm gonna take a break. You guys can try the challenge on your own, which is the database contains an incomplete list of the list of box office hits and their release year. In this challenge, you're going to get the results back out of the database in different ways. In the first step, just select the movies. So when you once you figure that out and hit next step, it's going to give you more instructions. So if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute or throw them in the chat. I will drop this link in Zoom in case you need it. And then feel free to work through that. And if you have any questions, let me know. And a quick reminder, if you are stuck, feel free to scroll down and use this documentation tab at the bottom. That should help you get unstuck and just give you a couple hints as to how we need to pull off some of our queries down here. We've got 4 people in on the poll. I'll wait until we've got like 5 or 6 votes and then keep going. All right, we've got 5 votes in, so I'm going to keep going here. Does anyone want to share their screen and kind of talk through the code as they understand it? No, you just want to keep the solutions to yourselves? So we say, learn one, do one, teach one. And so once you reach that teach it level, that's when I think you've reached true mastery. So does anyone want to share their screen and just talk through their code? Would you like me to talk through the code, or do we want to just move on to the next video?
Hey, Max, I can go through it.
I didn't finish. Oh,
Go ahead, Shaw.
go ahead, Shah.
Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great, thank you. So, oops, let me increase this one. So the first thing, we need to query the database. So select everything or the rows from the table. Then next is to select movies where release year is greater than or equal to year 2000. And it should be ordered by the release year so that the earliest release year is listed first. Was it greater than or greater than and equal or greater than?
I don't know how they worded it, but if you wanted to query greater than or equal, you could just add an equal sign after the greater than, and that would also filter it out based off of that.
Do you have a space?
Space is optional, but probably encouraged.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome job on that. So we're learning a little bit about our where query. So our where is literally just a filter that's returning less rows based off of that. And then our order is just sorting what we have. Okay, on to the next one. If you did not get it, feel free to go back tonight and finish it up.
We're back with our grocery list. I can see that it has 6 rows in it, but I can also see that we need to buy more than one of each item, like our bananas. So I'm not sure offhand how many items we'll end up buying total. And I'd like to know that total number so that when we're cashing out, we could just do a quick check to see if we have the right number of items in our cart. Well, to do that in SQL, we can use what's called an aggregate function. An aggregate function is useful for things like getting the maximum, minimum, sum, and average of values in our database. In this example, to get the total number of items, we'll start with select, then the name of the aggregate function we'll be using, sum, then the name of the column we want, and then from the name of the table we're selecting from. Ta-da! So we can see on the right that the sum is 15, so we should have 15 items in our cart if we got everything correctly. And notice if I go up here and change the number of bananas, because I'm going to invite my monkey friends over for a jungle party, we can see the sum increase in real time and get bigger and bigger. So we know that we're now going to need 67 items in our cart. Now we could easily try out other aggregate functions here because sum's not the only one. So if we wanted to know what is the most that we'll be buying of any one item, then we could use max. See, 56. Those are obviously our bananas. But this information is useful for this case. Let's go back to sum. Okay. Now, what if we wanted to make sure we had the right number of items after each aisle? Well, we can do that in SQL using the group by clause. We add it to the end of a query, specifying the column name to group by aisle. Okay, so now we can see that in one aisle we have 9, another of 1, but I don't actually know which aisle we're getting each of them in. So what we can do there is just add aisle to the beginning of this select. So there you can see, okay, so we're gonna get 9 items in aisle 2, 1 item in aisle 4, 56 in aisle 7, and 1 in aisle 12. Awesome. Now, how did that actually work behind the scenes? The SQL engine first did the grouping of the rows based on aisle. So first did this group by, then it summed up the quantity in each of those groups, and then finally it selected the first aisle value that it saw in each group. And, the IO value was the same for all of them. So we got the IOs back out. But we could have also said name here. And we do see a name for each of the rows, but it's a bit misleading because for some of these IOs, there are actually multiple items in that group, but the SQL engine just picked the first item out of it. So you really shouldn't be using something different from what you're grouping by because you might not get a sensible result. So we'll say IO, and now that's an accurate presentation of our data. Okay, so great. You've seen aggregate functions, you've seen group by, and now you can efficiently gather useful statistics on your data. Another tool for your SQL toolbox.
Any questions on that? All right, I am going to go a little out of order. I'm going to play the SQL video and then leave you guys to do the to-do list challenge and the project challenge. But let me just play this for you guys.
At this point, you've probably heard me pronounce SQL two ways, SQL or SQL. Some of you might even be mad that I'm pronouncing it one way or the other, and you may have very good reason for believing that your favorite pronunciation is the correct one. So what's the deal? Well, SQL was originally invented at IBM in the early 1970s, and the first version was called SEQUEL, and it stood for Structured English Query Language. That acronym, SQL, was later changed to SQL because SQL was already trademarked by an airplane company, and companies really don't like getting into trademark lawsuits. Nowadays, many of us still pronounce it SQL because it's shorter to say, and we've got historical reasons to claim that it's the right way. However, when I surveyed developers across the world, I found that in non-English languages, many of them pronounce it SQL, or, for example, SAQLA in Spanish. Since our videos get translated here on Khan Academy, I figured I'd make it easier for translators to match the pace of our videos by pronouncing SQL the long way. But in everyday life, I'm used to calling it SQL, so both of them come out of me. Now you know, it can be SQL or SQL, and you'll probably hear both the rest of your life. The world is a messy place, but at least you now have a way of structuring your queries about it, right?
So while either pronunciation is accepted, whenever you are writing it, it is always the three letters. You will rarely see it spelled out SEQUEL. That is how we pronounce it, and I'm the same way. You will hear me say SQL or you will hear me say SQL. Either way is fine when you say it phonetically, but when you're writing out like on your resume that you know SQL, you are going to use the three letters SQL. And again, that's structured query language. I often in an interview will ask what the acronym stands for. Because if you have invested the time into learning it, you should probably also invest the time into what the acronym stands for. Does anyone know what HTML stands for off the top of their head?
Hypertext Markup Language.
You got it. And CSS?
Cascading Style Sheet.
You got it. And so acronyms, we use them all the time. Any technical field uses a ton of acronyms. Knowing what they stand for is important. I have seen standardized query language. I believe structured query language is the more accurate one. But sometimes you will see standardized query language because basically the reason why SQL was created was there were all of these different databases and they were all storing data. But when you were trying to access different ones, no one had an agreed upon language that you could put in a query in one database and get back the same results from another one. So IBM, a dominant player back in the 70s, said, we've got to stop this. Like, we're going to all have competing databases, but we need one way to be able to put data in it and get data out of it that is not going to be different across every database. And so literally going all the way back to the 70s, SQL has become the dominant way to interact with any relational database. So there are newer databases like Mongo that use unstructured data stores. which I will find a way to weave into the curriculum some way without derailing us too much and going down a huge rabbit hole. But we are focused on SQL because SQL for the past 50 years has been the dominant database type. And in the past 5 to 10 years, we've had these unstructured data stores like Mongo become more prominent. They use documents instead of rows to store their data. We will cover that a little bit, but for the most part, we are sticking to our guns with SQL just because that's the dominant player. And Mongo, important to know the differences between them. Entirely possible your employer may be using Mongo. But like I said, only 2 major types of databases, those that are based in SQL, Postgres, MySQL, MS SQL, Microsoft SQL, or Oracle. Those are the 4 dominant MySQL based players. And then on the unstructured or the document or the non-relational based databases, Mongo is pretty much the only huge name. There are other alternatives out there like CouchDB, but Mongo is by far the dominant player in the non-SQL realm. Those are also called NoSQL, literally capital N lowercase o SQL databases, because they stand out from the crowd from literally not using SQL. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys do both the challenge on the to-do list and then the project. The project's going to be a little bit more involved than the other 2. But I will open up the poll, respond to the poll when you have both of them done. And then we'll kind of gauge how long that's taking you guys if we decide we want to move into the next module or not. And as always, come off mute if you have questions or stuck somewhere. No, Ariel, I don't care about your questions. You left us. Go ahead.
I was just looking, I got the store project one done, but I just wanted to make sure because it says on it, show at least one statistic. So I did it by name, price, and quantity. Is that okay, or am I supposed to be doing more?
They probably meant like try using a sum or a max or something like that as
Okay.
part of your select query. That's what I normally think of when I think of statistics. But if it gave you the check mark and said that it was done, that's all that really matters.
It didn't give me anything. It just tells me I can, like, they changed the way you save it, I guess. So it it just gave me the notification for that. That's it.
Yeah, I think for the projects, they just ask you like, did you do this? And you say yes, and you go through it that way. But yeah, when I think of statistics, I think of like doing a sum, doing a max, doing an average, like that kind of stuff. So if you just add that into your select statement, max parentheses, and then whatever the column name is in front of it, I would consider that statistics and call it a day.
Okay, how to submit this to you now that it has like the weird, like it says, if you'd like to save this code to your profile when you've completed, click the spin off. So does that mean you're not getting it unless we're clicking spin off, or when I'm clicking, I'm done? This didn't come up for any of the other ones.
I can.
It shows that I completed the other ones, but this is the only one that came up with that weird message at the top about it's not saved to my profile, I guess.
Can you share your screen? It doesn't say that it's done on my side. So click on the I'm done button up at the top.
Is that where I'll get my thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then
so
this
I got to
is
go through.
where
Go
you
ahead.
can just say, I swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God, I have completed this assignment. And once you get through that, it should show up as checked off on my side.
Okay. So this is, hold on. So I'm looking at this. So yeah, there needs to be some type of mathematical, something needs to be done besides this then.
Yes.
Either like a sum of the quantities or some other organization with some mathematical.
You got it.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's a good note for everyone. The way that you finish the projects is different than the way you finish the exercises. So when you are done the project, you click the I'm done button, and it's basically going to ask you a bunch of questions that you check off and you say, yes, I did this. Yes, I did that. And then once you fill out those drop downs and hit the final button, that's what will mark it as complete on my side.
I guess if you can't see it, we have a share thing as well, because it's showing in my project that I didn't complete it, even though I just saved it.
It shows up as done on my side now.
It does? Okay, mine says start. That's why I panicked. All right, thank you.
Yep, as after you get through those drop downs and hit whatever that final button says, that is what marked it as complete on my side. All right, so it looks like you guys are making good progress and you made it to the end of this this module, I believe they call it, this lesson. So we've got 2 more lessons to go tomorrow. I have assigned those over in Khan Academy, so you should be able to turn in all of those assignments as you complete them. I threw this in the chat. I will also mention it. If you are able to get through all the lessons, complete all of the exercises and the projects, and do not have any questions, you are welcome to take tomorrow off. However, I will mark you as missing if you do not have the assignments turned in on Khan Academy. So I want the proof that you have finished the assignments before you skip tomorrow. If not, I will go through all of the videos tomorrow, just like we did today. I will take the breaks for you guys to complete the exercises. I will talk through the videos as they complete the code, give you a chance to do the exercises and ask any questions as you are completing them. However, if you are feeling really good about this and want to steamroll forward, you are welcome to do so tomorrow. Get all the lessons, the exercises, and the projects complete. Submit them in Khan Academy, skip tomorrow, and then come back on Wednesday when we are going to start integrating all of the SQL stuff in with our JavaScript. So we're going to get Postgres installed on your computer. We're going to get a program called Beekeeper Studio installed, which is going to allow us to interact with our Postgres database in SQL land and be able to see all of that data visually. And then we are going to use the PG NPM package to start getting data sending back and forth and layering all of that into our messaging app and getting data into the database. That is all coming up on Wednesday. Tomorrow, we are going to keep going through the Khan Academy stuff. So again, I will be keeping track of attendance, but if you've got all check marks done in Khan Academy on my side, I will mark you as present tomorrow. Shh, don't tell Jesse. With that said, please fill out the 30-second feedback form tonight, because I know this is a lot different pace than how we have been teaching class. So I'm very interested to hear your feedback on that, to see if you guys like this, to see if this is something you would do again in the next cohort. Give me feedback on Khan Academy. Tell me that I'm a terrible, lazy teacher for using someone else's curriculum. Whatever you would like to throw in there, you are totally welcome to do that. Brielle, good question. I do like Khan Academy's other coding classes. I like Khan Academy a lot. They don't go super in depth in their topics. So you'll notice like this whole SQL thing is only 2 days long, and I wish they just had more content to go with it. So I like pairing Khan Academy with Free Code Camp. I haven't looked into Free Code Camp SQL exercises to see how robust they are. If you would like more practice, feel free to jump over to Free Code Camp and take a look at their SQL exercises. I will bring this up again tomorrow, but there are 3 additional links that I dropped in both the Slack channel and in the Zoom chat all the way up at like 5:35 today. But they are 3 links to Stanford courses. They are free to take. You just have to complete them in a 6-month period, and they say they take about 2 weeks to complete. They are all self-paced. We aren't going to go through them, but you do get a certificate at the end of completing them. I believe they have 4 database courses, and there were 3 that I recommended around SQL. And then I think their 4th one is around non-structured databases like Mongo, NoSQL, all of that stuff. So if you are looking for certifications to put on your resume, saying that you've completed a Stanford course is definitely not going to be anything that an employer looks at and goes, why'd you waste your time on this? So if you are looking or considering going into being specifically a database engineer, which can be a full-time job, that is definitely something to consider. That those 3 or 4 Stanford courses, really great resource. You can pay $50 and get like a verified certificate, which means I think someone actually like checks your code and verifies that you have completed the assignment. I'm not really sure how important the verified certificate is as opposed to just like the regular certificate for completing the course. But the Stanford courses are a great option. And there is a Stanford course called CS50 that gets into computer engineering, computer science basics, which is a very popular course and another great learning resource. So really recommend all of the Stanford courses if you are really enjoying the database stuff and could see yourself wanting to get more into like the inner workings of how the database works. And we will cover database design a little bit coming up, but really great options there. Definitely recommend looking into the Stanford course if you see yourself becoming a database engineer down the road. But Brielle, yes, do like Khan Academy's other courses, and I do like Stanford courses as well. Free Code Camp will always have a special place in my heart, but Khan Academy and Stanford courses are my other top 2 learning resources. Other questions? Awesome. If you guys get a chance, fill out that 30-second feedback form. I see one student has already submitted it, so thank you. Otherwise, I will see you guys at 5:30 tomorrow, unless you power through all the assignments, and then I will see you guys on Wednesday.
Max, can you just clarify all of the assignments? Are you talking about the 4 we had today, the 12 that popped up in my email, or the 24 that Ariel just noted?
So there probably aren't 24 other exercises. There are 24 other exercises, projects, and lessons. So you won't be able to complete the exercises or the projects unless you go through the lessons. So the lessons are like the individual videos that you have to watch, but you don't have to turn anything in on them. It's only the exercises and the projects that you have to turn in. But you would have to watch through the lessons in order to be able to do the exercises. So that's why I didn't assign the actual lessons. You only have to do the projects and the exercises, but you're going to have to go through the lessons anyway. So yes, there are 24 things total you need to go through and a couple articles that you have to read through. But the only thing that you absolutely have to complete that I am checking in on are the exercises and the projects. Which is basically every exercise and project in the whole Intro to SQL course at Khan Academy, which is broken up into 3 lessons, I think. But anyway, yeah. If you guys have any questions, let me know. If you think you have them done and want to double check and make sure they all show up as done on my side, feel free to ping me in Slack and I can check and clarify that. All right, you guys have an awesome night, and yeah, see you guys tomorrow or on Wednesday.